Pokemon Black and White may have been my first Pokemon games, but X and Y were the first Pokemon games I remember the release of. I was there for the reveal of Mega Evolution, the Korokoro leaks, all of it. However, truth be told, this hasn't left much of an impact on me. You'd think I'd be a little bit nostalgic for these games, but honestly, I'm not. This is a good thing though. It means I can assess these games with little to no biases getting in the way. Without further ado, let's do exactly that. But as always, I want to recap my personal playthrough first. I started off by naming myself Goofball. Afterwards, I go outside to meet my neighbors, Serena and Shauna, who introduced me to Tierno and Trevor. I decide on the nickname Top G for them to call me, and they give me my starter Pokemon, Fennekin, who I dub Cockburn. Shauna chooses a Chespin, and I body her before I deliver a letter from the professor to my mom. With that out of the way, me and my cohort go through Santaloon Forest and into Santaloon City, where we get the roller skates. I then beat the gym leader, Viola, to receive my first badge and the EXP share immediately after. I make my way into Lumiose City and finally meet Sycamore in his lab, who gives me a Squirtle that I ditch right after. Downstairs, I meet this dude named Lysander who talks about making a brighter world. Isn't he a nice guy? After a bit of dicking around in Lumiose, I go to Route 5 and run into this Lucario and its trainer, Karina. Next, I go past Camphreer Town, but before I can move too far ahead, me and Shauna discover that a snoozing Snorlax is blocking Route 7. To wake it up, we have to corral a Furfrou at Parfume Palace and have an oddly romantic fireworks viewing with Shauna. While at the palace, I caught a Honedge nicknamed Tobuscus in the surrounding area. Eventually, we get the Pokeflute from the Parfume Palace owner, and we use it to move the Snorlax. I battle my way along the rest of Route 7 and end up at Ambrose Town, where me and Serena are sent on a side quest to Glittering Cave. While riding on a Rhyhorn along the path to Glittering Cave, I step on a wild Helioptile, whom I dub and make my third team member. While there, we encounter these odd fashion freaks who call themselves Team Flare. When I get back into Ambrose Town, I restore this sail fossil I was given into an Amora I named Ice Cube. After that, I head to Silex City where we face and defeat the next gym leader, Grant. While passing through Geosenge Town, I run into Karina and her Lucarios again. This time I have a battle against them, which I win. My next objective is to face her as a gym leader in Shallower City, but before that, I have to navigate through Reflection Cave. I finally arrive in Shallower, and one battle with Serena later, I challenge Karina and beat her once more. I get Surf, ride over to Coumarine City, and immediately go against Serena and the grass gym leader, Ramos. I also talk to a fisherman in Coumarine so I can get the good rod and fish for my next team member, a Skrelp named Pedro. Then I head down to the power plant to restore power by getting rid of Team Flare and their admins, Aliana and Pitbull. Now that the power is restored, we can go into the part of Lumiose City that was previously in a blackout. Before I get there, I run into this giant talking about the flower Pokemon. With that weird interruption out of the way, I can go watch the next gym leader, Clement, light up Prison Tower in another oddly romantic moment with Shauna. I give Clement a Wedgie, and after talking to Lysander and Sycamore, go to Route 14 where we have another battle with Serena. I make it up through Route 14 and into Lavera Town, where me and my team fight and defeat Valerie. Then, me and Serena clear Team Flare and two of their bitch admins in the Pokeball Factory. With that, I finish up in Lavera Town and head east to Dindamil Town. After I get there, I make a brief detour into the Frost Cavern so I can help an Abomasnow rid of Team Flare and be able to ride the Mamoswine on Route 17. I do exactly that and trek past Route 17 and into Anastar City, where we defeat both Serena and the gym leader, Olympia. Immediately afterwards, Lysander sends a message to all Colosians that he is going to wipe out everyone but Team Flare with the weapon of mass destruction and return the world to a beautiful state. Serena and I refuse to let this happen, so we go to Lumiose to find Team Flare's hideout. I find the hideout below Cafe Lysander, and with it, I find Lysander himself. I beat him in a battle, but he doesn't give up after that, and I chase him down to the basement where he's holding that mysterious giant from earlier. The giant, named AZ, info dumps about some Pokemon war and the ultimate weapon, and he tells us not to let it be activated again. Unfortunately, the Team Flare scientist, Xerosic, presses the button to activate it anyway, and we have one final chance to go to Geosinge Town and stop it. In Geosinge, we go underground to Team Flare's secret hideout and fight Lysander again before the legendary Pokemon is revived, and I catch it to save the day. I also make it my sixth and final team member, nicknaming it AA Flight 11. Lysander finds us befriending the legendary and challenges us to one final battle. He, of course, loses and implodes the ultimate weapon in on itself, ending this threat to humanity once and for all. Next, I meet Sycamore at his request in Corway Town. I talk and have a battle with him briefly, then move on down through Route 18 to Snowbell City. On my way, I have rival battles with Shauna, Tierno, and Trevor. With them fought, I go into Snowbell and defeat Wolfric for my final gem badge. Having all 8 badges, I advance through Route 22, climb up Victory Road, and arrive at the Pokemon League. Inside waited the Elite Four, and here's how my battle with each member went. I pummeled Malva, Drasna was a breeze, Seabold got swept, Wilkstrom put up a bit more of a fight than the others, but was still no match for AA Flight 11. Finally, I was at the champion, Diantha. She gave me a little trouble, but in the end, my team pulled through and I bested her. At last, I was entered into the Hall of Fame, and a parade was held for me and my friends for becoming the champion and helping to stop Team Flare. However, at the parade, we're approached by AZ and challenged to one final battle, after which he reunites with his long-lost Pokemon, Floette. For the most part, gameplay has the same strengths and weaknesses as Black and White 2. HMs are still fundamentally trash, albeit sparsely needed, battling feels good, there aren't too many puzzles, and overall the game feels mostly polished. Everything is just as fine as it was before, with one notable exception: the difficulty. I know everyone and their grandmother has said this, but the main playthrough is way too easy. Almost every trainer in the game is a complete pushover. This is all for one reason: the change to the experience share. Before Gen 6, the experience share was an item you could put on one of your team members so they could gain EXP while not having to be sent out into battle. It was a useful little device for training weaker Pokemon. The way it works now is you turn it on and it will share experience amongst every team member. This isn't an inherently flawed system, but whoever did the playtesting at Game Freak clearly didn't realize how over-leveled it makes you throughout almost every part of your journey. All of my Pokemon were about 5 levels above everything they faced, up until the champion battle. It's like someone asked Game Freak to make it so battles weren't egregiously over-leveled. And as they did, the monkey paw in Game Freak's office curled its finger. I know I complained about that in my Black and White review, but seriously, this is way too far. I dislike the way the Elite Four was in something like Black and White, but even that is preferable to this. They need to do 2 things to fix the difficulty of X and Y. Balance the EXP share, and make it so that the enemy Pokemon actually have some strategy to them. Even if you turn the EXP share off, it skews difficulty in the other direction, so there's really no winning with the way it is now. Besides that one glaring issue, the only other thing I can recall people being unsatisfied with is the gems. They're in the same position as they were last generation, and this is exactly the problem. At about this point in the series, players had grown tired of them, and I can see why. They're all relatively easy, with barely any interesting puzzle or challenge to be found within them. On top of that, they've been the same way for 6 generations now. It's just one more thing that makes these games feel stagnant. The rest of what I want to talk about in this section is all minor stuff. The pacing is kinda odd, they front load Mega Evolution and backload the Team Flare plot. There's no more running shoes, you can automatically run without them. The movement is still in a grid despite being 3D, but luckily once you get the roller skates this isn't the case. Speaking of the roller skates, they're surprisingly fun to use. Lastly, there are a few rideable Pokemon around the region. Skiddo is pretty much the only fun one because Rhyhorn and Mamoswine both suck to control. These Pokemon are also seldom used. And that's it. Gameplay gets a 90 out of 100. It's far from unenjoyable. It's just that it doesn't fix any major existing problems. The Pokemon selection has impressed me on all fronts. Let's start by talking about the new Kalos Pokemon. If Gen 5 took the quantity over quality approach, then Gen 6 is quality over quantity. As always, you have some meh ones, and you have a couple of shitmons, but these are very few. Roughly 95% of the new dex has Pokemon ranging from solid to amazing. Because they didn't add a whole bunch, the designers spent more time on each individual Pokemon, and it shows. My only complaint is that despite having so many great designs, a good chunk of them aren't too fun to use. Next up is the old Pokemon selection, and Kalos is now the golden standard of how to do it. They put in a wide variety of great Pokemon from each generation. The final factor is Mega Evolutions. Mega Evolutions are limited time forms that certain Pokemon have the ability to transform into. I'll talk more about them soon, but I want to say that there's some really cool designs here. They're hit and miss at times, but that goes without saying. Overall, the designers did a good job at making them feel mega, if that makes sense. Pokemon selection earns an 87 out of 90. It's very good, just not quite perfect. Many Pokemon lack a certain oomph to make them stand out. That may sound weird, but it's the best way I can describe how I feel about it. I also find it funny how the region based on France is both a frog and snail Pokemon. There's a good mix of amazing and okay introductions in Gen 6. Firstly, new abilities, moves, and items. These should go without saying, but are always welcome. Next is the biggest one, Fairy types. I love the Fairy type. Game Freak threw us a curveball with a typing that no one could have expected, and I can confidently say it worked out. Fairy not only has a lot of new utility, but gives fresh life to some old Pokemon. My only issue with it is that it may be a bit too strong, but I'm not an expert in Pokemon's meta, so I can't really say for sure. Speaking of things that may be a bit too strong, we received Mega Evolutions as this generation's gimmick. I say gimmick because we'll start to notice more of these popping up and then disappearing from game to game. Megas can be used to make weaker Pokemon stronger, or give already strong Pokemon different playstyles. I wish Game Freak did more of the former instead of so many mega pseudo-legendaries, but overall they're pretty cool. Then we have Poke-Me. You can pet your Pokemon and play neat little mini-games with them. This is such a fun little thing to do, and I always find myself messing around with it. It also helps build a connection with your team members, which is arguably the main draw to Pokemon. In a similar vein to Poke-Me, you can also customize your character. It's just a nice, mostly pointless feature that allows the player to express themselves more. Finally, there's all the small shit. O-Powers, taking pictures, super training, horde battles, sky battles, the battle chateau, etc. Some have their niche uses, but for the most part it's things that you can easily gloss over. The last little thing I should mention is that the online functionality in X and Y is great. This section gets a 73 out of 80. The only things I held back points for was a lack of too much extra shit to do, and certain features being underwhelming. Where do I even begin here? I guess a good summary is that it simultaneously tries to do so much, yet so little. The introduction to Team Flare is perfect, because it sets up just how horribly written they are. They literally just come out and say that all they want to do is make themselves happy at the expense of others. Throughout the entire playthrough, we have almost no reason to take these guys seriously, and then all of a sudden, Lysander is revealed as our twist villain who wants to genocide everyone but Team Flare. No. Just no. Remember how I said they backloaded a lot of the Team Flare plot? Well, that's one of the main issues with the story here. It feels like they tried to do what Gen 5 did with its story, except with much less screen time dedicated to it. By the time they reveal Team Flare's actual plan and goals, it's too little too late. Everything interesting about this story is thrown so out of left field that any attempt at trying to take it seriously is trumped by how caught off guard you are. In fact, I simply don't think a plot with this kind of topic can even work in a Pokemon game. Even if it could, it wouldn't work with the level of writing we have on display here. Oh my god, the writing is just fucking awful. Dialogue is either generic or corny. I don't even have to explain why, just look at all these examples I'm putting on screen. There is some awesome lore in these games that is buried beneath fundamental storytelling issues, and that's a damn shame. You know what else is a damn shame? The characters. There is one character I like, and it's just because she's a dumbass who spouts some funny lines every now and again. Every character has a cookie-cutter personality. Shauna is silly, Serena is serious, Tierno is into dance moves, and Trevor is a... The only ones who have anything going on are Karina and Lysander. Lysander I'll at least give credit for being better than someone like Cyrus, but that's a very low bar. The dude makes one Holocaster and decides, well, my plan A for saving society didn't work, so let's go with plan B, mass homicide. Karina, I only say has something going on because she's integral to you getting megas and has a bit of a personality. I could list off every character I don't like here, but I've wasted too much time on this section already. The only other notable thing here is that there's this weird pseudo-romance plot with Shauna, and this butler gives you Protect after you watch fireworks with her. Very funny, Game Freak. 35 out of 70. If you're keeping count, that's the lowest score this section has received in any game thus far. What really makes this section worse than others in the past is a lower quality of writing and extreme tonal whiplash. Kalos, despite having a lot of fun and memorable areas, feels very plain. There's just not a connecting theme here. It feels like the past few regions have had their own identity. Hoenn was a tropical archipelago with an equal amount of land and water. Sinnoh was a colder climate with lots of myths and legends surrounding it. Unova had a folksy, quaint vibe to it, alongside a lot of history. Meanwhile, what does Kalos have? It's regal, I guess, but besides that and the fact there's a weapon of mass destruction built under one of the towns, there's really nothing that gives me a distinct feeling here. This maybe isn't my strongest point, but I felt I had to mention it. Anyway, the region is not bad at all. I just wish there was more to it than the fact it was based on France. 54 out of 60. Music's good. It's not my personal favorite soundtrack, but it still gets a perfect 50 out of 50. Enough said. I feel the only appropriate way to start off this section is by addressing the jump to 3D. It looks excellent for their first time, and I think a lot of the problems with this game are because they spent so many resources on their first foray into 3D. The only complaint I have is that the textures can end up looking generic at times, and some of the proportions are goofy. I was originally going to end my thoughts on 3D there, but instead I'll address a complaint I hear about the new models. Some people say that, compared to Gen 5, they're less expressive. Okay, let me lay this out for those who say that. The reason they aren't constantly animated like in black and white is because it would look ridiculous. Look at Grumpig. He's doing a little jig the entire time he battles, and it looks pretty fucking stupid. Also, it's not like they're completely stiff. They do, in fact, have little flavor animations. It's just that they don't play all the time. Rant over. Moving on. As always, we have to talk about the post-game. You can catch legendaries, visit the Friend Safari, face the Battle Maison, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, this post-game is small. So small, I didn't even need my friend to explain it to me this time. I think there's a couple areas that unlock, and you can always explore Lumiose. However, for the most part, it's very underwhelming, especially compared to the past few generations. I guess that about does it. Everything else was very minor quality of life or cosmetic shit. The biggest of these being the expanded space for names. I'll give Other a 39 out of 50, mostly earning points for doing a fantastic job with the transition to 3D. Now, we can move on to our synopsis of the games as a whole. But before we get into that, let's get into today's sponsor, Manscaped. I have an extremely hairy cocksack that needs grooming. It's like a jungle down there, and if my dick and nuts are the Amazon rainforest, then Manscaped is Brazilian logging companies. Click the link in the description and use code IHaveHairyBalls at checkout for a 2% discount on all Manscaped products. Thanks to Manscaped for giving me money. Tallying everything up, Pokemon X and Pokemon Y got a total score of 428 out of 500, or about an 86%. X and Y took one step forward and 2 steps back. This first 3D installment marks Game Freak's leap into what will be the future of this franchise, and considering that, they did a fine job. However, because of the focus on making it over that threshold, the time invested into areas such as gameplay and story took a noticeable hit. I know everyone says this, but X and Y desperately needed a third game. There are so many unfinished aspects to Gen 6 that prevent it from reaching the quality that it could, and it's really sad to think it will probably remain halfway up the peak forever. This is only the second time that a Pokemon game has been worse than the one before it. The last time this happened, Game Freak rebounded with the best games in the franchise to date. Can they do it again? Or does this mark a slow and downward slide for Pokemon installments to come? I hope to find out soon, because the next games I'll be reviewing are Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon. Yep, putting that one in the video.